I recently took a selfie of my wife and at the top of the page, you can see Michelle and I taking a pause as we walked across a local lake. Well, in case you haven't noticed, it's winter where I live and all the lakes are frozen. So one of my friends said, you're just crazy to walk outside when the wind chill's 10 below. I guess not everyone agrees on the best way to spend time together. So I was recently sitting in a meeting with a number of marriage mentors, and we are talking about date nights and the importance of spending time with your partner. And we talked about ways that as a church, we could encourage couples to connect with each other. And I've had this conversation before, and I think it's an important conversation. I started to ask myself, though, what is the best way to connect with each other and to connect with your spouse? So some of the ideas that we kicked around and I've heard before, one is to have a regular date night. Other people say, well, forget the date night. Daily touch points are more important. Spend time together, talk to each other. And then I've heard the opposing viewpoint, which is talking's overrated. Do an activity together. I've heard, hey, put down your phone when you're out on a date. And I've heard other people say, you know what, use your phone in order to look up discussion topics and things you're interested in talking about. Speaking of phones, some people say just text regularly. Others say, well, don't text each other. It's face-to-face is far better. So, it seems like there's different ideas about how to connect. So remember, the goal is to build connection and strengthen your bond. And as mentors, it's easy for us to prescribe what works for us. And I've learned over time that each couple is different in how they connect. The important thing is that they're reaching the goal, connection. So I've talked to people that need conversation to feel connected. They want to understand their partner's thoughts and feelings, and they love to have deep conversations about doubts and fears and hopes and dreams. This is what makes them feel connected, is that deep talk. But I've also talked to people that don't need conversation to connect. They would rather do an activity together. And that might mean something like sitting in a fishing boat and not saying a word. Well, I am one of those people that loves to have deep conversations. I love to have philosophical debates, and I love to hear someone else's deepest feelings. But my wife is different. She finds connection in talking about day-to-day activities. She's more than happy to talk about what I would call surface things. To her, that's where we live and where connection happens. I admit I have been guilty of sitting in a restaurant and judging other couples. Have you ever seen that couple that just doesn't say anything? They sit across from each other and they eat and they don't talk. And I've thought to myself, well, they must not be very connected. Well, but with age comes a bit more experience. And I've now had the experience where my wife and I don't talk much during dinner. Rather, we sit and quietly enjoy each other's company, but we still feel connected. So don't misunderstand me. I value connection through communication for all couples. And if you and your spouse never talk to each other, you risk a growing disconnection. And if you never talk about anything but your kids, as an example, you risk not building a relationship that will survive when the kids leave home. So it is important to talk and to express yourself. However, I have learned that some couples communicate differently than other couples. And as a mentor, I want the couple to find what works best for them. So at my church, we're in the middle of planning a date night for couples. And we want couples to build into their relationships a regular pattern of spending time together. Well, that is just a fantastic goal, something I wholeheartedly endorse. So, do you save it all up for the big date night? Or is there a way to build connection throughout the week? What's the best plan to be building connection? For some, daily touch points are far more important than a date night. For them, it's important to say goodbye when they leave. And maybe they talk about what their day is going to entail. Then when they find their partner when they get home and they give them a hug. And then maybe they spend a few minutes each day talking about what happened. Maybe they spend a few minutes every day just talking and connecting. So those daily touch points become more important than a big date night. Some people love to receive text messages from their partner during the day. And every time they receive one, it communicates, I'm thinking about you. Well, that's great. But others go, you know what? I don't want to text. I'd just rather talk face to face. So don't bother me during the day. Our job as mentors is to help the couple to establish connection. So what are practical things that they can do that will build a bond? Is it date nights? Maybe it's text messages. Maybe it's some different daily touch points. And all of those are great ideas. What's going to help them build their best connection? John Gottman is one of the top marriage researchers in the world, and he talks about the importance of bids in healthy relationships. In other words, healthy couples turn towards their spouse 86% of the time. Unhappy couples that divorced average about 33%. In other words, happy couples engage with their spouse, and they turn toward them and their spouse responds. But here's what's tricky. What's considered a positive interaction? Well, that differs from person to person. And spending time together is part of this. So what do you enjoy doing? Some people love to fish. Some people hate to fish. We often ask couples, what will help? And I've heard lots of ideas about what's meaningful to people. And when couples start to focus on building connection, their marriage satisfaction will rise. So here's some tips. 1, don't assume. You remember what works for you may not work for them. So 2, help the couple to find ideas. Ask them to identify things like, is it date nights? Is it daily touch points? Are there just activities they like? And when can they find time to talk? And then 3, have them put together a plan. Ask them to commit to actions. Is it as simple as a text? Maybe they need to set aside an evening each week to talk. Maybe they're not going to go out for a walk when it's freezing outside on a cold lake, but maybe they'll find other connection points. So those 3 tips again. Don't assume, help the couple to find ideas, and put together a plan.